Hi, good morning. Welcome everyone. So today here I'm very excited to introduce Nina Webster, the CEO of Dimerix, ticker code DXB, Delta X-Ray Bravo, an ASX listed company. It's a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company that's working to improve the lives of patients with inflammatory diseases, including both kidney and respiratory diseases. Dimerix is currently focused on developing its proprietary phase 3 product candidate, DMX-200, which we will be discussing further in depth today. So welcome, Nina.
Hello.
So Nina, first and foremost, I want to kick this off by saying to you, I'm very excited to have you on the interview today. I've been doing a lot of interviews with CEOs, especially in mining, and today you're actually the first CEO I get to speak with on biopharmaceutical products. So first and foremost,
that's
Nina,
great to talk to you.
Fantastic. So Nina, can you first start this off by telling us a little bit about Dimerix and what your company specializes in?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, we are an Australian publicly listed clinical stage company, and we've got a portfolio of drug candidates for inflammatory diseases, including kidney and respiratory, as you mentioned a moment ago. We were founded in 2004, originally in Western Australia. Our lead clinical asset is DMX-200, or in some territories it's known as Takeover, and it's in what's called a phase 3 clinical trial for a disease called focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, and that's a rare type of kidney disease. In addition to that, we have DMX-700 under development for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So both DMX-200 and DMX-700 drug candidates, they were identified using our platform technology, and we use that platform to identify new opportunities that can strengthen the company's pipeline and diversify development risk.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So can you explain and go a little bit more in depth about your main drug, DMX-200, which is currently in phase 3 clinical trials for kidney disease, and explain to us what FSGS is. I'm going to leave that to you to pronounce because I don't want to embarrass myself. And most importantly, how this drug actually benefits your patients.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, it's a bit of a tongue twister, this one, but definitely not to be said after a glass of wine. So FSGS means focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. And what that means is some sections of the kidney filtering units are scarred. And what happens is over time, more and more sections of that kidney become scarred until there are not enough cells to effectively filter the blood. And that leads to kidney failure that requires dialysis and or transplantation. So in a healthy individual, it means that the kidney acts as a filter, and it essentially allows little or no protein to spill into the urine. As the kidney becomes damaged, as is the case with FSGS, the kidney becomes more leaky. And what you see is protein spills from the blood into the urine, and that's what we call proteinuria. Now, as such, proteinuria is what we call an early biomarker of kidney function. The more protein in the urine, the faster the rate of kidney disease progression. So what we're trying to do with DMX-200 is essentially reduce the inflammation in the kidney by reducing the scarring and cell death. And in doing so, what we should be seeing is the amount of protein in the urine reducing. And that's why proteinuria is a really important endpoint. And that's important for the viewers today to understand. Proteinuria is a really important endpoint in DMX-200 study. Now, in FSGS, kidney failure occurs within about 5 years. So it's a really aggressive disease, and it ultimately requires dialysis or transplant. As you can imagine, that's a huge strain on quality of life, but also cost. But unfortunately, in this disease, around 60% get reoccurring FSGS in the transplanted kidney, and no one knows why. So again, that's not an answer. As this affects children as young as 2 years old, as well as adults, there are no drugs approved anywhere in the world. The treatment options are really poor. So we have the potential to be the first approved drug for FSGS, orphan kidney disease, anywhere in the world.
And can I just ask you a little bit more? So is FSGS a chronic disease? Because something you said earlier is once we lose those cells or they're damaged, there's no way back.
That's correct. As these cells die off, unfortunately, kidney cells are unlike other cells in the body. You can't regenerate them. That's why kidney disease is progressive. So you can imagine as you lose cells, they have to work even harder, causing more damage, causing more inflammation, and you go round and round the cycle faster and faster, which is a really poor outcome for these patients. Sadly, there is nothing available for these patients anywhere at the moment. The current standard of care is what we call a blood pressure medication or an angiotensin receptor blocker. It reduces blood pressure, and what it's trying to do is reduce pressure on the kidney vessels to try and help reduce some of the inflammation. Our drug is targeting inflammation specifically, and what we're trying to do is reduce inflammation, which prevents the scarring and cell loss.
Fantastic. Thank you for such an clear explanation for us. Now, I also understand that Dimerix has been given an orphan drug designation for DMX 200. So can you explain to our viewers and our investors, what does this orphan drug designation actually mean? And most importantly, what sort of impact this actually has on pricing on the markets that you're entering into?
Yes, it's a great question. Orphan indication means it's a rare disease. And in FSGS, it affects over 220,000 people globally. So because there are fewer patients, global regulatory agencies provide various incentives for commercial industry to develop products in those indications. So in the first instance, it means we only have to complete a single phase 3 clinical trial before potential marketing authorization. This means the study we're in at the moment is the last study we need to do before we can submit for approval. Orphan drugs also get what's called exclusivity. That means that during the exclusivity period, no generic can enter the market and our patents cannot be challenged. So in the US, that's 7 years, and in Europe, it's 10 years. And that is considered incredibly valuable to potential licensing partners. Now, orphan drug pricing is another type of incentive, as you mentioned. The average orphan drug retails for around $7,000 per patient per month, or $84,000 per year. That's the average. Now, another drug recently approved for a different type of rare kidney disease is currently retailing for just under $10,000 per patient month, or US $120,000 per year. And you can imagine that with the numbers that we spoke about before, this makes the FSGS a really commercially attractive market. Now, note, really important for the viewers to understand that when we talk about $10,000 per patient per month, that is not what the patient pays. That's what the insurer or the equivalent of the PBS pays. In the US, for example, orphan drugs get access, patients with orphan drug access, they pay the lowest copay, and that usually means around $25 or $35 per month out of pocket. So that's why it is perfectly affordable for those patients.
And can I ask you a little bit more? So it's $120,000 per annum for this treatment. I guess with the word is how much, what is the lifetime treatment timeframe per patient you expect?
Yeah, another great question. So this is what you mentioned earlier, the term chronic disease. So what that means, it's ongoing. Once a patient starts taking DMX 200, they will be on it until either they die or they end up with kidney failure. So it is a lifetime product. It's a single capsule, one capsule in the morning, one capsule in the evening. So a really simple dosing regime.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. So obviously the results of your phase 2 trials have qualified Dimerix to proceed to phase 3. Can you explain to our viewers and our investors, like, how long you expect phase 3 trials to last for?
Absolutely. So you're looking on this slide at phase 2 clinical trial. That was completed in 2020. And what you can see here on the top left-hand side is that what we saw is a 17% reduction in proteinuria. Now, that's that term we spoke about earlier. It's the reducing the amount of protein in the urine of our drug versus placebo. And essentially, we have doubled the effect of the background standard of care. This is what's got the nephrologists really excited globally, is that we really are doubling the existing treatment that is available to these patients for blood pressure. Now, when you come to the phase 3 clinical trial, on the back of this really encouraging data, we proceeded into the phase 3. Just before I touch on the phase 3, what you're looking at on this slide here is how you correlate proteinuria, reduction of protein in the urine, to what we call kidney function, or EGFR. So on the left-hand side, you see for every 10% decrease in proteinuria, you go across to the right-hand side, you see a corresponding change in what we call EGFR or kidney slope. That means that we are changing the trajectory of your kidney disease function decline and improving that. So that is what's so compelling. So the Action 3 phase 3 trial, it's what we call a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study of DMX-200 in patients with FSGS who are receiving that background blood pressure medication. So our study is continuing in 16 different countries right now in over 70 clinical sites. So the full study, as you can see here, will follow 286 patients across 2 years. And ultimately, at the end, we measure kidney function as well as proteinuria. However, what you can see is there are 2 interim analyses built in. And in March this year, we announced that the Action 3 phase 3 trial in patients with FSGS was successful in that first interim analysis of proteinuria efficacy endpoint. What that means is using a statistical model, the analysis has shown that DMX-200 is performing better than placebo in reducing proteinuria, which is a fantastic outcome. And what that means is that we're on track for our final clinical endpoint. And as such, this is a really encouraging outcome for the patients as well as the investors. We also think that this adds a large amount of value to the DMX-200 opportunity because it's a much bigger cohort than the phase 2 clinical trial. Now, the second analysis on this slide is intended after the first 144 patients reach week 35, which based on current recruitment times is expected around the middle of 2025. Now, if that data is compelling, there is the potential that we could submit for what's called an accelerated or conditional approval in those territories. And what that means is for a rare disease or an orphan disease, it's a marketing approval that fills an unmet medical need. So it's a bit like the emergency use you saw during COVID. So if successful at that point, while the study will continue in the background, we could already be on market.
And Nina, can you help our viewers and investors understand as well? So you're at phase 3 clinical trials now, but really, I mean, there's been so much work that's led up to this particular point. So could you give us like a bit of an understanding, like how many years that DMX-200 has been in the pipeline to get to this particular point, and for us to now be talking to you, I guess, at this exciting and pointy end of the cycle?
Absolutely. So the process for DMX-200 was started in about 2012. That's when the first invention for DMX-200 came about. Now, in clinical trial development, it's a raft of background activities that aren't always publicly discussed. And that includes, for example, all of the early, what we call preclinical work, the phase 1 studies, the phase 2 studies, all of the manufacturing pieces. This is what's really important as well, that often people forget about, is there's no point in getting a great clinical trial result if you can't actually manufacture it at commercial scale and be able to sell the product. So there's a lot of the formulation development, container closure, what we call shelf life. That means the expiry date. You have to be able to do a lot of testing for expiry dates on different products, storage conditions, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that happens in the background that leads us to, once we go into a phase 3, we have the final formulation in a final, what we call container closure. That means the pot it's put in. As well as the expiry dates all sort of set ready for a regulatory approval.
Excellent. Wow. So 2012, we're in 2024, 12 years to get to this point.
Correct. Yeah.
So Nina, we've talked a little bit about it being a rare disease and the patient size for about 220,000 patients globally. Could you talk to me a little bit more now about the addressable market size for DMX-200? The commercial opportunities, and I also know that you've already secured some licensing partners.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about market size, what we're talking about is what we call the addressable market. So that's the total market that we could take a slice of the pie, if you like. So there's an estimated around 220,000 diagnosed patients across the 7 major markets, and that's not even including China. So as you can see on this slide, that little pie chart on the left-hand side gives you a breakdown of patients in the 7 major markets. Now, note that FSGS is a disease that's diagnosed by biopsy, which is a medical procedure. So as such, to have been diagnosed, it means that the patient must have had access to healthcare. And if the patients have access to healthcare, then they will have access to the treatment. So that's why that pie chart on the left-hand side really does give you an indication of the target market, the addressable market for DMX 200. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll have a look here at the pricing. We actually spoke about this earlier on. In Europe, in US, it's just shy of $10,000 per patient per month. In Europe, it's actually not far off that. It's just over $8,000 per patient per month in a different type of rare disease. So you put that into context with the number of patients on the left-hand side, and you can see that this is a potentially very commercially attractive opportunity.
Excellent. And also China. I heard that you've got some special relations with China as well around the delivering the drug into China and also the licensing. Can you go a little bit more into that?
Yeah, so what you can see again, that's why we've added China onto this slide, is China actually has one of the largest kidney disease problems in the world. Now, that's largely driven by just the size of their population. But that does mean it's a very commercially attractive opportunity for us, given every citizen in China has access to healthcare. And often China, particularly with rare disease, follows European pricing. So it does give a very compelling opportunity for China. Last December, we announced that we had achieved what we call an open IND with China. What that means is that the Chinese regulatory authority, the FDA equivalent in China, has agreed that the clinical trial design that we have for our current phase 3 study could be appropriate for approval in China, not having to do a separate study at all. And we are open to recruiting patients in China. Again, a great opportunity for us.
Tremendous. So now we're just going on to the next slide. As I said, I'm aware you've already got a licensing partner in Europe. So can you talk to us a little bit more about these licensing opportunities? And for me, I'm very curious why Dimerix has chosen to go down the licensing path as opposed to actually marketing it in-house and distributing it yourselves directly.
Yeah, that's again a good question, and you never say never. But at the moment, we have no plans to take the drug to market ourselves. We ultimately do plan to commercialize with a partner, and our preference is generally to work with partners that have a strong sales and marketing infrastructure and experience, as well as that regulatory piece. So you take the licensing deal that we did with a partner in Europe in October 2023, and I'll touch on the deal terms in a moment. But the key component for us is you have to think of that as an extension of our infrastructure. So we've gone from an Australian-based, Melbourne-based company into a reach through to advanced farmers, regulatory teams, commercial teams, logistics distribution teams, which is great extension for our capability, etc. So the partnership we did with Advance is for European Economic Area, UK, Switzerland, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And in return for those rights, essentially Dimerix can receive up to 230 million Australian dollars in the total upfront and milestone payments, of which just shy of 11 million we received last November. So a great outcome for us. But the key thing to remember when we look at this slide here is that Europe is, whilst it's considered one of the prominent pharmaceutical markets in the world, it really only represents about 20% of the diagnosed patients across the major markets. And as such, we recognise there's still a large component of value that's available for licensing, with US being potentially the largest opportunity.
Well, I was going to touch on the US. So do you have any further words to add on to the US market?
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say across all of the territories that are available, we have received a significant amount of partnering interest from partnering pharma companies globally. Yep. We have received several term sheets for potential regional deals. We have parties engaged in due diligence and negotiations. Note that these are non-binding and they're subject to the negotiation board approval. But of course, that could be a potential significant upside for investors as well as patients.
Excellent. So, Nina, I'm on to the next part, what really excites me. Okay, so right now here we are looking at Neuron Pharmaceuticals, NEU, which actually surged from $1 to in 2021 to nearly $20. That's a remarkable 2,000% growth, or in our industry, we call it a 20-bagger. And in fact, some of our investors and our members are already familiar with this stock as they have actually bought into it earlier. So Nina, can you tell me a little bit more about the reason why we have this slide up here today, and what sort of synergies that you see between Neuren Pharmaceuticals and Dimerix?
Yeah, absolutely. And urine is a great example of what can happen to companies, particularly developing in that orphan disease space.
Mm-hmm.
So Neuren, for those who aren't aware, they're an ASX listed company and they're focusing on neurodevelopmental disorders. And its flagship product was also an orphan indication with a pediatric indication. The company, as you can see from this slide, they went from just over 100 mil market cap to almost 3 billion on the back of completing their phase 3 and achieving market approval. So to your point, I think there's a number of synergies between the two companies. First is that both companies are targeting that orphan indication and both have what we call a pediatric component of that, so children. Both companies did an early regional deal. So Neuren, as you can see on the slide, did a US deal and we did our European deal. And both companies initiated a phase 3. So you can see the market cap growth for Neuren was absolutely phenomenal, and it's a great example of what can be achieved. So we've got a little way to go to match it, but if you look at the same stage of development of licensing and phase 3, our trajectory is so far very comparable.
Excellent. And look, Nina, as you already said, it's still very early days, but I'm very curious here more around, I know that that when you reach phase 3 clinical trials, is there a potential, just curious, that you think Dimerix could be a takeover target as well?
We've not, something that we've not actually entertained at this time, but again, you can never say never if the right opportunity is there. Our major focus at the moment is licensing for regional deals, and that's very much the focus for the team with the negotiations at the moment.
Excellent. And patient outcomes, right?
Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, there's absolutely nothing for these patients. Very poor prognosis. Transplants don't work. So there's a desperate need, which is why the interim analysis result that we had is really encouraging for those patients as well.
Excellent. So, so Nina, one concern with us is always with any early stage companies is cash flow. I understand that you've recently raised $20 million. So I'm very curious now, what is your burn rate? And I guess since that last raise, how much cash do you still have in the bank?
Yeah, absolutely. So to your point, we did complete a capital raise of 20 million in March of this year. Based on the March quarter end, which we announced about a week ago, we have just over $35 million in cash. So what is really important is those funds will not just support the phase 3 program, which it does, but it also provides us with a really strong balance sheet, which puts us in a great negotiating position with potential partners.
Excellent. Now, Nina, I'm going into the next part, which I often is my favorite part. Let me, I love doing research on everybody that I interview. It's part of, I guess it's what I love. Okay, and I can see from your extensive experience that number one, you have a PhD in pharmaceutics from Cardiff University. And what really interested me is that you actually have a master's in IP law, which made it quite an unlikely combination. So can you share a little bit more about your experience and how that you can integrate, I guess, both of these specializations together?
Yeah, absolutely. So to your point, my background started a little differently to many of the CEOs, and I've been in the pharmaceutical industry over 30 years, which is a bit frightening to say these days. I actually started as what's called a trainee lab technicians in the laboratory of big pharma company, and I worked my way up through new product development, technical transfer, scale up. My first degree is actually in pharmacology, and that was completed while I was employed full time by that large pharma company. And then I went back to complete the PhD in pharmaceutics as well. I moved to Australia, and you can probably tell from the accent, I'm not originally Australian, but I moved to Australia in 2001, originally as a senior scientist, where I was the inventor of several products that were commercialized globally. And then I transitioned into intellectual property law and management. I completed my master's degree in IP law, including contract law, and worked full-time as the project manager through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, including regulatory engagement. I moved into commercialization just over 18 years ago. I've completed my MBA, and I've been involved with multiple licensing transactions as well as investor relations during that period. So to your point, overall, a really mixed background in science, business, and law, But that means that my ability to translate between the different subjects is a skill to be able to talk to each of the different groups: investors, business development, patients, etc.
And I think something I also know, you worked with Wyeth Pharmaceuticals, is that, and just so our investors and our viewers, if they're not aware, that actually got bought out by Pfizer in 2009.
Correct.
So thank you so much, Nina. I have really enjoyed this interview. Actually, one more quick question here is, because we talk about so much about the commercial aspects here, is so if this results in positive outcomes for phase 3 trials, what outcomes can we expect for your patients? Like, what improvement in quality of life?
Yeah, again, a really great question, Gia. Essentially, when we talk about previously that reduction in proteinuria, what we're trying to do is slow down the kidney disease progression. An example there was that 10 to 20% reduction in proteinuria could equate for anywhere between 5 and 10 years of life on the kidney. So if you can delay dialysis by 5 to 10 years, that is a very compelling outcome for the patients, but also for the healthcare systems.
Thank you. I think everybody at some point in their lives gets in contact with people who are affected of some level of kidney disease or any in general. So I really appreciate that. So Nina, thank you so much for giving us your time and your articulate responses. I really enjoyed it. So for all our viewers and investors and members, if you have any questions, can you please directly email it to us at info@eastcoastresearch.com.au or info@sharesinvalue.com.au, and then I will forward them through to Nina, if that's okay with you, and then
Perfect.
her team will respond accordingly, right?
Perfect.
And lastly, Nina, good luck. I'm going to be paying very close attention to your phase 3 clinical trial outcomes. And again, at the end of the day, for me, we really hope that we can give these patients a new opportunity.
That's great. Thank you, Gia. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.